be present in those spaces, but also help our partners, our allies, build partner capacity as well. And so for the investment of a small number of professionals working with partners, we can achieve tremendous results. But presence speaks volumes, and so we're going to continue to do what's necessary to make sure that our partners in the region, in those various regions, know that we're the best investment, we're the best partner to have, and we're going to be with them for the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Chair now recognizes Mr. Scott from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I know we've talked a lot about Russia, Iran, China, the alliance between the three. I guess the most brazen thing that I've ever seen in recent times with an attack on the United States has been what China did with flying a spy balloon ever since the military installations inside the United States. And yet, less than 15 days after that occurred, Ford Motor Company announced a multi-billion-dollar alliance with Communist China on battery technology. Secretary Austin, I'm concerned about how we purge China from the DoD supply chain. I'm concerned about corporate America partnering with Communist China and then slapping a U.S.-made sticker on it and us buying it through our DoD with U.S. tax dollars, specifically with regard to the Chinese battery technology. And I just want to make sure that the DoD is aware of Ford Motor Company partnering with Communist China on the battery technology, and make sure that the DoD is committed to not purchasing Communist China's battery technology. Can you speak to that issue and what you at the DoD are doing to purge China from the DoD supply chain, make sure we're not simply buying Chinese technology with a U.S. sticker on it?
Well, thanks, sir. As you know, this is a far bigger issue than just the Department of Defense. We support a rules-based global market and that's been what we've supported for a long time. As you do that, certainly you will have supply chains that run through places like China. But what you've seen our leadership do recently is move to, as best we can, begin to onshore some of those capabilities that are represented in those supply chains and limit our liabilities there and limit our exposure.
Secretary Austin, if I could, would you agree that if you send money to one person and that person sends money then to Communist China and Communist China then uses that money against the United States, that's a circle where our dollars are being used against us?
I think the best thing that we can do and are doing is to continue to invest in our industrial base, continue to invest in our...
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm getting short on time, and I want to move to another question, but I would just tell you that I think it's counterproductive for the Department of Defense to purchase technology developed by the PLC and Chinese corporations. I think there's better technology available, and corporate America does not need to be allowed to sell, stick an American sticker on Communist China's technology and sell it to us, especially at the DoD. Moving to another question, General Milley, there are a lot of activity in our own backyard just south of our border. I've been there a couple of times. The drug cartels' activity and capabilities have increased drastically over the last few years. We're seeing larger influxes from a lot of countries, including China. We've seen a 1,000% plus increase in the amount of people coming from China. They can get a 14-day travel visa into Mexico and then simply come to the U.S. border and claim asylum, and 72 hours later they're in our country. Is Southcom, and I realize Southcom operates south of Mexico, Southcom and Northcom, are they getting adequate resources to target the illegal immigration, whether it be from China or the transnational criminal organizations coming from south of there and the drug cartels?
Given our global commitments, I think they've got adequate resources. However, I would say that there's no COCOM out there at all who would tell you that they get all the resources that they need. So they always need more. But I've talked very frequently with Laura Richardson and Glenn Van Herk. There's no question that there's a vulnerability on our southern border. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. You've got thousands of people coming across every single day. There's a lot of drugs coming across every single day. You've got a major league fentanyl crisis. So there is clearly a vulnerability there. And, of course, the precursor chemicals for the fentanyl, et cetera, come from China and so on. So, yes, there's a vulnerability there. Could they use more assets? Sure, they could use more assets. But this is fundamentally, in my view, at this point in time, until this policy changes, if there's ever going to be a policy change. Right now, this is fundamentally a law enforcement and intelligence operation to work with our host nations of either Mexico or some of the Central American nations to stem the flow of the illegal migration and to stem the flow of the drug trade. I've spent a lot of time in Latin America. It's a very complex problem. I've been involved in the drug war for years. Very complex, not easy.
My time is expiring. Yeah. It is a complex problem, but we are being taken advantage of. And when you can get a 14-day travel visa to Mexico, and then you can simply present yourself to the Border Patrol, and then you're released into this country less than 72 hours, that's a pretty easy way for someone who wants to hurt Americans to get into this country.
I don't disagree with that.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, both of you set an example of service that should inspire every American across the globe, and it's an honor to have you here this morning. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I'm grateful to hear that the Brandon Act, which would ensure service members have a way to request mental health assistance in an emergency, is going to be rolled out to active duty service members by mid-April. I'll be keeping close tabs on this rollout. It's taken over 15 months for the Department of Defense to simply implement this policy since we passed it into law. Over 500 service members have died by suicide during that delay. So I'm grateful it's happening now, but I know a lot of the families who lost a loved one want to know why it wasn't done sooner. Mr. Secretary, you've outlined the impressive investments we need to make in the coming year, but we can't make all of these critical investments if we don't divest of some things that aren't worth the cost to sustain them. What are some of the most important cuts you have made in this budget that you're concerned Congress will overrule for parochial political concerns?
Well, thanks, and let me thank you personally for what you did with the Brandon Act, and I know that you'll stay focused on it. And I want to assure you that the issue of suicide is enormously important to me, and I know it's important to the chairman as well. So we really appreciate what you've done there, and we'll continue to press. In terms of, let me go back to your question again and make sure I got the full context of the question. So,
look, what are you worried? What cuts are you making in this budget that you're worried that parochial political concerns in Congress will overrule?
So you've heard us ask for relief on things like A-10s before. That it's a I love that airplane, but and I know you love it too because you've been on the ground and these guys.
I think we should get rid of it. But what else besides A-10s?
LCSs, some of the earlier variants of LCS.
Would you be able to provide us a list of some of these cuts that you think are strategically important for us to make?
Right. Yeah, we will. I think it's folded into our budget there, but we will.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to pivot to talk about our investment in progress in hypersonic weapons for a second. Are hypersonic missiles stabilizing or destabilizing weapons?
Now, they're potentially destabilizing, and the issue is, the development of an effective defensive mechanism to guard against. Having said that, as you know, the Russians have used hypersonic technology in Ukraine several times, and it hasn't guaranteed any type of victory. As a matter of fact, the Ukrainians are in a very good place right now and struggling to improve.
Well, look, Mr. Secretary, I agree with you that these are potentially destabilizing weapons. A lot of your senior commanders agree. General Von Herk said in a hearing a couple weeks ago that if you can't see hypersonics, it's hard to do continuity of government. It's certainly hard to protect your nuclear posture, and that, he felt, eroded our strategic stability because, of course, it's very different than in traditional intercontinental ballistic missiles where we see them coming, they know they're going to get the same response, and that mutually assured destruction ensures that that neither side starts a nuclear exchange. I will note that your STRATCOM commander argued that they were stabilizing as long as we get as many as the Russians and the Chinese. But of course, the Russians and Chinese are developing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles. What is our deterrent against them?
Well, first of all, I am confident in our nuclear triad. It is the bedrock of our deterrent capability. In terms of hypersonics, we're interested in investing in the quantities that support our warfighting concept. So we need some hypersonic capability, but we also need a number of subsonic, highly survivable.
Mr. Secretary, I'm running out of time, but if I just may make the point that we're not even trying to match this capability that the Russians and Chinese have in nuclear tipped hypersonic missiles, because our assured second strike, as the chairman laid out, with our traditional triad, is what deters their use. And yet it feels like we're in an arms race here trying to catch up with Russia and China for the worst reasons, because we're both rushing to get more of these hypersonics. They're fundamentally destabilizing. That makes the world less safe for all of us. And so I think it'd be helpful to hear not just a strategy to win this arms race, but a strategy to stop it. I'm sorry, I've run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Stefanik of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask both Secretary Austin and General Milley about the unique role the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum play in great power competition. I recently had the opportunity to visit with Major General Anderson, who's doing a great job after the tremendous leadership by General Beagle up at Fort Drum, and we discussed General Anderson's Alpine initiative to return the 10th Mountain Division to its roots of cold weather operations and mountaineering. Given that both you, Mr. Secretary, and you, General Milley, were commanding generals at Fort Drum, you're very familiar with the post, with the unique strengths of 10th Mountain. What role do you see the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum specifically playing in outcompeting our adversaries in the Arctic?
I think 10th Mountain Division can play a significant role and does play a significant role in that endeavor. I would also say that they're a multi-purpose division. It can, as they've demonstrated, they can go a number of places and be very, very effective because their strength is the quality of their people and their leadership, and that's been demonstrated over and over again. So.
General Milley?
Yeah, thanks, Congresswoman. A couple of things. First, they're trained in Arctic operations, so that's a key thing. And as we know, the Arctic's opening up. Secondly, is they're light infantry, so they can rapidly deploy. In fact, it's the most deployed division in the Army. So the rapid deployment is key, and that acts as a strategic deterrent. They were one of the first units we deployed to Europe. In fact, we've got a unit just coming back from the 10th, and there's another unit going over from the 10th over to the Ukraine area. The third thing is they're optimized for urban combat as light infantry. They're very effective, and as the world becomes ever more urbanized, the probability is higher rather than lower that decisive fights, battles will occur in highly dense urban areas. So 10th Mountain has a lot of unique capabilities, and they bring to the fight rapid deployment, urban combat, mountain warfare, winter warfare, and it's a great outfit. It's a great port. It's a great place to work and live and serve our country.
Yeah, thank you, General Milley. And Secretary Austin, you took my line, General Milley. I always like to point out that it is the most deployed division in the U.S. Army since 9/11, and we're grateful for so many military families that I've gotten to know over many years. I want to shift gears here, still related to Fort Drum, but specifically missile defense. Iran has never been closer to a nuclear weapons capability and has demonstrated a space launch capability, which has a direct technical application to an ICBM. For over a decade, it's been U.S. policy to be ready for a third homeland missile defense site should the Iran threat mature. The previous NORTHCOM commander testified as long ago as 2015, an additional missile defense site would give us increased inventory and increased battle space with regards to a threat coming from the direction of the Middle East. And while you have both Iran increasing their development of nuclear weapons capabilities, as well as North Korea continue to develop their ballistic missile capabilities, I want to get your response to Fort Drum has been designated as a potential third site. Why that would be important to include a third homeland site to provide with more confidence to intercept any potential missile. Secretary Austin.
I'll certainly defer to the work that we're doing being completed and looking at the results of that work. But certainly Fort Drum is it's has tremendous capability and a great community. So I think if that site is chosen, I think it would be a good choice.
That site has been chosen by the Department of Defense. That was announced a few years ago. We worked on that in the NDA. It's also current in previous NDA. Fort Drum has been designated as the potential third site. General Milley.
Potential third site.
Potential third site.
Yeah.
So, what is the process of ensuring that we're focused to meet the needs, not of, the past, but of the future, 2030s and 2040s, because it takes a long time for that infrastructure investment, for that to be potentially completed. So what is the timeline, General Milley or Secretary Austin?
I don't think a timeline has actually been established, but I can tell you that what we're talking about and what you're talking about, I think, is a project that's been out there for quite some time on the books. You're looking at probably 20 to 40 silos, something like that, and then the missiles to go with it. It would probably take a decade to actually put that in. It would take billions. I don't know exact cost figures, but it would take billions. The question is it strategically worthwhile? I personally think yes, because we have a missile threat from North Korea, but we have an arrayed system of sensors in the Western Pacific all the way to California, and we've got missile capabilities that can engage North Korea. When you're dealing with China and Russia, you're dealing with an assured second strike because of the volume. But in Iran, if they were to develop the ICBM level of missiles, which they haven't yet, but if they do, and they're developing the piece parts with space launch vehicles, and if they were to then develop a nuclear weapon to put on top of that, that's where it becomes important. Now, are they on the road to do that? I think that's a choice that people in a judgment that the intelligence community and others would have to make. I personally think developing those systems on the East Coast would be helpful, and it would further enhance the protection of the United States.
Thank you very much.
Generally, time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Austin and General Milley, for being here before us today. General Milley, I just want to thank you for your distinguished service, 42 years to our nation. I know our nation is better for it, and I hope you enjoy a well-deserved retirement. And I know you'll continue to serve in some way to help our country. My district houses multiple military installations, including Camp San Luis Obispo and Vandenberg Space Force Base. Vandenberg is unique because of the coastline it sits on faces south, making this major range and test facility base a safe and ideal setting to test land-based strategic deterrent assets and to safely place satellite payloads into polar or Earth orbit. Despite Vandenberg being the only federal West Coast range in the United States, investments in launch infrastructure are far behind a crowded East Coast range ecosystem. We are expecting an incoming legislative proposal from the department that advances the range of the future by allowing commercial investment for on-base launch infrastructure, a proposal I am very supportive of. Secretary Austin, can you speak to the importance of maintaining bi-coastal ranges for our nation's national security and DoD readiness?
It's critical. Absolutely critical. And you heard us talk about it's critical for a number of technologies that we need to invest in, not only the testing of things like hypersonics, but also the launching of space-based platforms as well.
And the reason I raise it, Secretary, is if it's critical, then I think we're lagging behind the critical investments in infrastructure for it to continue to fulfill a strategic mission. And so I raise it in that fashion. And as you aptly characterize it, it's critical, but I think it needs to be matched by the investments we make in that range.
I agree, and I think you may have heard me say earlier that one of the things that we did early on is, we reached out to industry and talked to them about what they needed to be able to speed up the development of certain capabilities. Ranges and testing facilities was one of the things that they raised. And so my R&E undersecretary and others went after this, and we began to invest in that in last year's budget and also in this year's budget as well. So,
thank you. Secretary Milley, in your submitted testimony, you mentioned some of the capabilities of our adversaries in the space domain, and that if left unsecured, our capabilities in space will become strategic vulnerabilities. You call on Congress to support a significant increase in the budget for space capabilities. Can you expand on what you think this increase in investment should look like? In your opinion, what space capabilities should Congress be focusing on to ensure our space assets are secure?
Well, I think this budget's got over $30 billion, I think, in space assets, which is critical. And then the development of Space Force was really critical in the last administration. That's being carried forward here. In terms of the domains of war, you've got the traditional ones of land, sea, and air, and subsea, but you now have cyber and space. And that country that has significant, robust, resilient capabilities in space is likely to have a decisive advantage at the beginning of the next war, if there is a war. Hopefully there won't be. So what do we need? We need resilient, robust, and lots of space capabilities, both offense and defense. We tend to invest in very, very high-tech, unique one-of sort of satellites. What we really need is lots of little satellites. We need the ability to sense and see. We need the ability also, if necessary, to communicate. A lot of our communications, our GPS systems rely on space. So building that and making it more resilient, more robust, and redundant, survivable, if you will. And I think a lot of smaller systems in space, rather than really big ones that if the Russians or the Chinese took them out, we would be blinded. I think that's the key for right now. There are offensive capabilities, but we're not prepared to go there yet in a public forum.